The wrench slipped from Stella Ward's grease-stained fingers, clattering against the concrete hangar floor with a metallic echo that seemed to reverberate through her very soul. Above her, suspended in the maintenance bay like a sleeping predator, hung the F-16 Fighting Falcon that would soon change everything. But right now, at 0600 hours on a sweltering Nevada morning, Stella was just another face in the crowd of maintenance personnel that the pilots barely acknowledged existed. What they didn't know was that the woman in the oil-stained coveralls, crouched beneath their million-dollar war machine, held secrets that could rewrite everything they thought they knew about excellence, expertise, and the true meaning of service. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for youth. Morning briefing at Nellis Air Force Base buzzed with the familiar energy of another training exercise. Squadron leader Captain Jake Morrison strode into Hangar 7 with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Behind him followed his wingman, Captain Ryan Brooks, Lieutenant Sarah Chun, and Lieutenant David Martinez, each carrying themselves with the practice swagger that came with flying the world's most advanced fighter jets. Stella Ward barely glanced up from her inspection checklist as the pilots approached. She had learned over the past 3 years at Nellis that invisibility was survival. The less attention she drew to herself, the smoother her days went. Her supervisor, Master Sergeant Tom Bradley, had made it clear from day one that maintenance crew was expected to be efficient, thorough, and silent. "Morning, Sergeant Bradley," Captain Morrison called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate responses. "We need a full pre-flight on Viper 7, Major. Henderson wants us airborne by 0800 for the red flag exercise." Bradley jogged over, clipboard in hand, his weathered face already showing the stress of another demanding day. "Yes, sir. We'll have her ready." Ward's been working on the avionics since 0500. Morrison's gaze swept over to Stella, who was methodically checking connections in the aircraft's nose cone. Something about her precision caught his attention, but not in a way that inspired confidence. "That's your senior technician?" he asked, making no effort to lower his voice. "Ward's thorough," Bradley replied, though his tone carried a defensive edge that didn't go unnoticed by the assembled pilots. Lieutenant Chun stepped closer, observing Stella's work with the critical eye of someone who trusted her life to the maintenance crew's competence. "She looks pretty young. How long has she been working on F-16s? 3 years here at Nellis," Bradley answered, but Captain Brooks had already lost interest in the conversation. "3 years?" Brooks laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the hangar's ambient noise. "I've got flight suits older than her experience level. Are you sure she knows what she's doing under there?" Stella's hands never paused in their work, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had heard variations of this conversation countless times, the pilots questioning her competence based on her age, her gender, or simply their assumption that anyone in maintenance coveralls couldn't possibly understand the sophisticated systems they flew. Captain Morrison moved closer to the aircraft, his presence imposing even in the cavernous hangar. "What exactly are you working on, Airman?" Stella finally looked up, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. Her eyes were steady, professional, betraying none of the frustration that had been building for 3 years. "Pre-flight diagnostics on the AN-APG-68 radar system, sir. Running a full spectrum analysis of the transmitter and receiver components." "Spectrum analysis?" Lieutenant Martinez stepped forward, his expression skeptical. "That's pretty advanced terminology for basic maintenance. It's standard procedure for ensuring optimal radar performance," Stella replied evenly, returning her attention to the diagnostic tablet in her hands. The screen displayed complex waveforms and frequency patterns that would have been meaningless to most people, but her fingers moved across the interface with practiced expertise. Captain Morrison studied the readouts over her shoulder, though The technical details were largely beyond his understanding. As a pilot, he knew how to operate the radar system, but the intricate engineering behind its function was outside his wheelhouse. Find anything interesting? Stella hesitated for a moment, her training warring with her instincts. The diplomatic answer would be to assure him that everything was functioning normally. The truthful answer was more complicated. The phase coherence in the transmitter is showing minor drift, she said finally. It's within acceptable parameters for flight operations, but there's a pattern in the degradation that suggests a component failure within the next 50 flight hours. The pilots exchanged glances. Lieutenant Chun, who had the most technical background among them, frowned at the diagnostic screen. How can you tell that from these readings? Pattern recognition, Stella answered simply. The drift isn't random, it's following a predictable curve that indicates thermal stress on the magnetron assembly. The component was likely manufactured with a microscopic flaw that's now beginning to manifest under operational conditions. Captain Brooks scoffed. You can tell all that from squiggly lines on a computer screen? The mathematics of system degradation are fairly straightforward once you understand the underlying physics, Stella replied, her voice remaining calm despite the condescension in Brooks' tone. Mathematics and physics, Morrison repeated, something shifting in his expression. Where exactly did you learn about radar physics, Airman Ward? It was the question Stella had been dreading for 3 years. The question that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed simplicity of her current life. She could feel the weight of multiple gazes on her, could sense the curiosity that her technical knowledge had sparked. Technical training, she said, keeping her answer deliberately vague. Air Force Electronics School covers the fundamentals. Electronics School doesn't cover predictive failure analysis based on frequency domain patterns, Lieutenant Martinez observed. He had an engineering degree from the Air Force Academy and recognized knowledge that went far beyond basic technical training. Stella's hands had stopped moving across the diagnostic interface. She was acutely aware that she was approaching dangerous territory, the kind of scrutiny that could lead to questions she wasn't prepared to answer. I read a lot, she said finally, echoing the same deflection she had perfected over years of hiding in plain sight. Master, Sergeant Bradley sensed the tension building and stepped forward. Ward's right about the radar system. She's caught 3 potential failures in the past 6 months that could have caused mission aborts or worse. Her diagnostic skills are exceptional. Exceptional for maintenance crew, Captain Morrison clarified, his tone making it clear that he considered this a significant qualification to any praise. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Stella felt the familiar burn of being dismissed, of having her capabilities minimized by people who couldn't conceive that expertise might exist outside their narrow understanding of military hierarchy. Sir, she said quietly, her voice carrying a note that none of them had heard before, a subtle authority that seemed at odds with her position. Would you prefer that I not identify potential system failures? Because I can limit my diagnostics to the basic checklist if that would be more comfortable for everyone. The challenge in her words was delicate, but unmistakable. For the first time in the conversation, the pilots were forced to confront the logic of their position. They were essentially arguing that their maintenance crew was too competent. Captain Morrison studied Stella with new interest. There was something in her demeanor, a confidence that seemed inconsistent with her rank and role. No, Airman. I want you to do whatever it takes to keep our aircraft mission ready. But I'm curious about someone with your apparent expertise ending up in basic maintenance. Sometimes life doesn't go according to plan, Stella replied, her voice carrying years of carefully buried pain. Lieutenant Chun, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped closer to the diagnostic screen. The pattern you're seeing, how confident are you in your analysis? Stella met her gaze directly. Confident enough to recommend grounding this aircraft until the magnetron assembly can be replaced. The hangar fell silent except for the distant sounds of activity from other maintenance bays. Grounding an aircraft was not a decision that maintenance personnel made lightly, especially not when it would interfere with scheduled training exercises. "That's a pretty significant recommendation," Captain Morrison said slowly. "Major Henderson isn't going to be happy about losing an aircraft from today's exercise. Major Henderson will be less happy if Viper 7's radar fails during a training engagement and results in a mid-air collision," Stella replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was suggesting. Asterisk. The pilots exchanged uncertain glances. They were caught between trusting the judgment of someone they had just met and dismissing the concerns of a maintenance technician whose recommendations could disrupt their training schedule. "Sergeant Bradley," Morrison said finally, "what's your assessment?" Bradley looked at Stella, then at the diagnostic readings, then back at the assembled pilots. His expression showed the weight of a decision that could affect careers, safety, and mission. "Readiness. Ward's track record speaks for itself," he said finally. "If she says there's a problem, there's a problem." But Captain Brooks wasn't ready to accept the judgment of maintenance personnel, regardless of their track record. "With all due respect, Sergeant, this is a multi-million-dollar aircraft we're talking about. Are we really going to ground it? Based on the opinion of someone who learned radar physics from reading books in her spare time?" The dismissal in his voice was sharp enough to cut, and Stella felt something shift inside her, a door that had been carefully locked for 3 years, beginning to crack open. "Captain Brooks," she said, her voice taking on a tone that made everyone in the hangar turn to look at her. "The AN APG-68 radar system operates on X-band frequencies between 8.5 and 12.5 gigahertz. The magnetron assembly I'm concerned about generates those frequencies through electron oscillation in a resonant cavity. When thermal stress causes microscopic changes in the cavity dimensions, it affects the resonant frequency and phase coherence of the transmitted signal." She paused, noting the stunned expressions around her before continuing. "The degradation pattern I'm seeing indicates that the cavity is expanding at a rate of approximately 0.3 micrometers per flight hour due to repeated thermal cycling. At current operational parameters, this will result in frequency drift beyond acceptable tolerances within 47 flight hours, give or take 3 hours depending on mission profiles." The silence that followed was deafening. The level of technical detail in Stella's explanation went far beyond anything that basic electronics training would have covered. This was the kind of deep engineering knowledge that took years of specialized education and experience to acquire. Captain Morrison was the first to find his voice. "Where the hell did you learn to talk like that?" And there it was, the question that Stella had spent 3 years trying to avoid. The question that threatened to expose everything she had worked so hard to leave behind. As she looked at the faces surrounding her, some confused, some suspicious, all suddenly very interested in who she really was, Stella realized that her carefully maintained anonymity was beginning to crumble. What none of them knew was that the woman standing before them in maintenance coveralls had once held a top-secret clearance and designed radar systems that were still classified. What they couldn't have imagined was that their basic maintenance technician had spent years working on projects that would have made their F-16s seem primitive by comparison. But that was a story for another time, and Stella wasn't ready to tell it. Not yet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The tension in Hangar 7 could have been cut with a combat knife. Captain Morrison's question hung in the air like smoke from a crashed aircraft, demanding an answer that Stella Ward wasn't prepared to give. She could feel the weight of 6 pairs of eyes studying her, analyzing every micro-expression for clues about who she really was. "I think," Stella said carefully, returning her attention to the diagnostic tablet, "the more important question is whether you want to fly an aircraft with a failing radar system, It was a deflection, and everyone knew it. But it was also strategically brilliant. She had shifted the conversation from her qualifications back to flight safety, forcing the pilots to confront their own priorities. Lieutenant Chun, who had been quietly processing Stella's technical explanation, stepped closer to examine the diagnostic readouts. Unlike her male colleagues, Chun had learned early in her military career to recognize competence regardless of its packaging. "Show me the thermal stress patterns you're seeing." Stella's fingers moved across the tablet interface with fluid precision, calling up a series of waveform displays that painted a complex picture of the radar system's performance. "Here," she said, pointing to a subtle oscillation in the frequency output. "This microvariation shouldn't exist in a properly functioning magnetron. It's a signature of cavity deformation." Chun studied the patterns, her engineering background, allowing her to follow Stella's analysis to a degree that impressed even herself. "The amplitude variation is almost imperceptible. How did you even notice this?" "Pattern recognition becomes instinctive after a while," Stella replied, then immediately regretted revealing even that much about her experience level. Captain Brooks, who had been growing increasingly frustrated with the technical discussion, threw his hands up in exasperation. "This is ridiculous. We're going to be late for briefing because our maintenance tech thinks she's some kind of radar engineer." "She might be onto something," Lieutenant Martinez interjected unexpectedly. He had been running calculations in his head, and the numbers were starting to align with Stella's predictions. "I've seen similar failure patterns in electronic systems during my Academy research project. The thermal cycling hypothesis is actually quite sophisticated." Master Sergeant Bradley watched the exchange with growing unease. In 3 years of working with Stella Ward, he had come to trust her technical instincts completely. She had never been wrong about a system diagnosis, never missed a potential failure, never caused unnecessary delays. But he had also never seen her display this level of theoretical knowledge. "Ward," Bradley said quietly, "walk me through your recommendation one more time." Stella took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either vindicate her analysis or brand her as an overly cautious technician who didn't understand operational priorities. "The magnetron assembly is experiencing thermal stress that's causing dimensional changes at the microscopic level. These changes are affecting the resonant frequency of the cavity, which impacts phase coherence in the transmitted signal." She paused, calling up another diagnostic screen. "Right now, the degradation is subtle enough that it won't affect basic radar functions. You can take off, you can track targets, you can complete your training mission. But under high-stress conditions, rapid maneuvering, extended operation at maximum power, temperature extremes, the system could fail catastrophically." "Define catastrophically," Captain Morrison said, his voice taking on the gravity of someone who understood that radar failure in combat conditions could mean death. "Complete loss of situational awareness during the most critical moments of flight," Stella replied without hesitation. "No target tracking, no threat detection, no terrain avoidance. In a training exercise, that means a possible mid-air collision. In combat, it means you're flying blind into hostile airspace." The hangar fell silent again, but this time the silence carried weight. These were pilots who had trained for years to handle equipment failures, but radar loss was one of the nightmare scenarios that kept flight instructors awake at night. Lieutenant Chen was studying Stella with new interest. "The level of system integration knowledge you're displaying, that's not standard maintenance training. Where did you really learn this?" It was the question Stella had been dreading, asked by the one person in the group whose technical background was sophisticated enough to recognize the depth of expertise she had accidentally revealed. "Books," Stella said, falling back on her standard deflection. "Technical manuals, engineering journals, online courses during off-duty hours." "Bullshit," Captain Brooks said flatly. "I've got an aerospace engineering degree, and what you just Described requires hands-on experience with radar design and manufacturing. You don't learn that level of detail from reading manuals. Stella felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever her carefully constructed cover story was challenged. She had spent 3 years perfecting the art of appearing competent enough to do her job well, while avoiding the kind of scrutiny that led to uncomfortable questions about her background. Maybe, Lieutenant Martinez said thoughtfully, we should be less concerned about where she learned it and more focused on whether she's right. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through technical databases. According to the maintenance logs, this aircraft has 847 flight hours on the current magnetron assembly. If Ward's degradation rate is accurate, we're looking at failure sometime around 890 to 900 hours. That's next week, Chun observed. The implications hitting her immediately. Captain Morrison had been quietly processing the conversation, weighing operational requirements against safety considerations. As squadron leader, the decision ultimately fell to him, and he could feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Sergeant Bradley, he said finally, what's your professional opinion? Bradley glanced at Stella, seeing something in her expression that he had never noticed before. For just a moment, her carefully maintained facade of humble competence had slipped, revealing depths of knowledge and experience that seemed inconsistent with her position as basic maintenance crew. Sir, Bradley said slowly, in 3 years, Airman Ward has never been wrong about a system diagnosis. Not once. She's prevented 4 potential in-flight emergencies and saved the Air Force approximately $12 million in aircraft damage and mission delays. The statistics were impressive, but Captain Brooks remained skeptical. That doesn't change the fact that she's making predictions based on theoretical knowledge that she shouldn't possess. Maybe the question isn't how she knows what she knows, Lieutenant Chun said quietly. Maybe the question is why someone with her apparent expertise is working as basic maintenance crew instead of designing radar systems for Lockheed Martin. The observation hung in the air like a challenge. It was the logical question that none of them had wanted to voice. Why would someone with advanced engineering knowledge choose to work in a position that was clearly beneath their qualifications? Stella felt her heart rate spike as the conversation moved into territory she couldn't navigate without revealing more than she was prepared to share. The careful balance she had maintained for 3 years was beginning to crumble, and she could see the curiosity in their eyes evolving into something more dangerous. Genuine investigation. Sometimes, she said quietly, people end up in positions that don't reflect their full capabilities. It was an admission that said nothing while revealing everything. The tone of her voice carried years of carefully buried pain, hinting at a story that none of them could have imagined. Captain Morrison studied her face, noting the subtle shift in her demeanor. For the first time since entering the hangar, he was seeing Stella Ward not as a maintenance technician who happened to be knowledgeable, but as a person carrying secrets that ran deeper than technical expertise. All right, he said finally, making the decision that would change everything. We ground Viper 7 pending magnetron replacement. I'll inform Major Henderson that we have a legitimate safety concern. The relief on Stella's face was visible, but so was something else, a flicker of satisfaction that suggested this wasn't just about preventing equipment failure. This was about being right, about having her professional judgment validated by people who had initially dismissed her capabilities. Thank you, sir, she said, her voice carrying a note of genuine gratitude. Don't thank me yet, Morrison replied. I'm also recommending that you be assigned to the investigation team for this component failure. If your analysis is correct, the Air Force needs to understand why our quality control processes didn't catch this during manufacturing. Stella's stomach dropped. Assignment to an investigation team meant scrutiny, background checks, security clearance reviews, all the things she had spent 3 years avoiding. Sir, that's not necessary, she said quickly. I was just doing my job. Any qualified technician would have noticed the same patterns. No, Lieutenant Chen interjected. Any qualified technician wouldn't have noticed those patterns. What you demonstrated today goes well beyond standard diagnostic procedures. The Air Force needs people who can think at that level. As the pilots began discussing logistics for the mission delay and component replacement, Stella found herself trapped in a nightmare scenario. Her attempt to do the right thing to prevent a potential aircraft failure had inadvertently drawn exactly the kind of attention she had spent years avoiding. Master Sergeant Bradley approached her as the pilots moved away to make their phone calls. "Ward," he said quietly, "I don't know what your story is, but I've got a feeling we're about to find out." Stella looked at him, seeing concern rather than suspicion in his weathered face. "Sergeant, Don't," Bradley interrupted gently. "Whatever it is, we'll deal with it when the time comes. Right now, you just saved lives and prevented a mission failure. That's what matters." But as Stella watched Captain Morrison speaking intently into his phone, probably briefing Major Henderson on the situation, she realized that the careful anonymity she had built over 3 years was about to be shattered. What none of them knew was that Stella Ward wasn't just a maintenance technician with unusual technical knowledge. She was someone whose real story would challenge everything they thought they knew about talent, service, and the price of pursuing excellence in a world that didn't always reward the right people. The investigation that Captain Morrison was requesting would uncover more than just a manufacturing defect in a radar component. It would reveal secrets that had been buried for reasons that went far beyond simple career disappointment. And once those secrets came to light, nothing at Nellis Air Force Base would ever be the same. The call came 2,347 hours, 3 days after the Viper 7 incident. Stella Ward was deep in sleep in her small apartment, off base when her secure phone, the one she hadn't used in over 3 years, began vibrating against the nightstand with an urgency that cut through her dreams like a siren. She bolted upright, heart hammering against her ribs. Only 3 people in the world had this number, and 2 of them were supposed to be dead. The display showed a number she didn't recognize, but the encryption signature was unmistakable. Her hands trembled as she answered. "This line is compromised," she said immediately, using the code phrase that would identify her while warning the caller. "Negative, Phoenix," came the reply, using a callsign she hadn't heard in 3 years. "Line is secure. This is Blackbird Command. We need to talk." The voice belonged to Colonel Rebecca Hayes, her former commanding officer at Area 51, the woman who had recruited her for Project Nightfall, the woman who had promised her that her sacrifice would save lives. "Ma'am, I'm no longer cleared for this conversation," Stella said, her training warring with the flood of emotions that hearing Hayes' voice had triggered. "Your clearance was never revoked, Phoenix. It was suspended pending operational necessity. Consider it reactivated as of 0000 hours today." Stella's mouth went dry. A reactivated clearance meant only one thing: something had gone catastrophically wrong, and they needed her specific expertise to fix it. "Colonel, I'm currently assigned to maintenance duties at Nellis. I can't just—" "We know exactly where you are and what you've been doing," Hayes interrupted, "including your little radar diagnosis 3 days ago. Impressive work, by the way." Captain Morrison's report made very interesting reading. The confirmation that her activities were being monitored sent a chill down Stella's spine. She had been so careful, so deliberately ordinary. How long had they been watching? "Ma'am, with respect, I fulfilled my obligations to the program. The agreement was that you would maintain operational readiness pending recall," Hayes said firmly. "We're recalling you, Dr. Ward." The use of her real title hit like a physical blow. Dr. Stella Ward, former principal research scientist for advanced radar systems at Area 51, the woman who had designed stealth detection algorithms that could identify enemy Aircraft invisible to conventional radar. The woman whose work had been so classified that officially it didn't exist. What's the situation? Stella asked, abandoning any pretense that she could refuse the recall. Not over this line. Transportation will arrive at your location in 6 hours. Pack light. Tell no one. Your cover story is a temporary assignment to Wright Patterson for specialized training. Colonel, I have responsibilities here. People are depending on you to do what only you can do, Hayes interrupted. The radar signature anomalies you detected 3 days ago weren't isolated to one aircraft, Phoenix. We've got similar patterns showing up in F-22s, F-35s, and B-2S across multiple bases. What you identified as thermal stress isn't thermal stress at all. Stella felt the blood drain from her face. If the degradation patterns she had observed were appearing across multiple aircraft types, it suggested something far more sinister than manufacturing defects. Sabotage? She asked quietly. We'll brief you fully when you arrive. But Phoenix, whatever's happening, it's targeting our most advanced aircraft. The ones with the systems you designed. The line went dead, leaving Stella staring at her phone in the darkness of her apartment. Around her, the simple furnishings that had defined her life for 3 years suddenly felt like props in a play that was ending. She had known this day would come. Despite the carefully crafted appearance of a normal military career, despite the deliberate mediocrity she had cultivated to avoid attention, she had always known that her past would eventually catch up with her. Dr. Stella Ward had been one of the youngest people ever to receive top-secret clearance for advanced weapons research. At 26, she had been designing radar systems that could detect stealth aircraft from hundreds of miles away. At 28, she had cracked the electromagnetic signature patterns that made Chinese and Russian fighters invisible to American sensors. At 30, she had discovered that someone within the program was selling her research to foreign governments. Memory of that discovery still made her stomach clench with familiar nausea. She had been working late in her lab at Area 51, reviewing telemetry data from a test flight, when she had noticed discrepancies in the mission logs. Flight patterns that didn't match the official records. Radar contacts that had been deleted from the permanent files. Investigation that followed had revealed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the defense contractor community. Her own research supervisor, Dr. Marcus Sullivan, had been selling classified radar algorithms to Chinese military intelligence for over 2 years, but Sullivan hadn't worked alone. The network included Pentagon officials, defense contractor executives, and foreign intelligence operatives. When Stella had tried to expose them, she had found herself branded as a security risk, her clearance suspended, her career destroyed. Official story was that Dr. Stella Ward had suffered a psychological breakdown due to work stress and had been quietly transferred to routine duties pending recovery. The unofficial reality was that powerful people had wanted her silenced, and the easiest way to silence a brilliant scientist was to destroy her credibility. So she had accepted the transfer to Nellis under her current identity, trading her doctoral credentials and top-secret research for the anonymity of basic maintenance work. The agreement was simple. She would disappear into the routine duties of aircraft maintenance, and in exchange, she would be protected from the people who wanted to ensure her silence was permanent. For 3 years, the arrangement had worked perfectly. She had hidden her expertise, avoided attention, and built a quiet life that bore no resemblance to her former existence as one of the military's most brilliant radar engineers. But now, it seemed that quiet life was about to end. As she packed the few belongings that mattered to her, Stella's mind raced through the implications of Colonel Hayes' call. If the radar degradation patterns were appearing across multiple aircraft types, it suggested that Sullivan's network was still active. More troubling, it suggested that they had found a way to sabotage American aircraft using her own research. Irony was bitter. The systems she had designed to protect American pilots were being turned against them by the same people who had destroyed her career for trying to expose the truth. Her secure phone buzzed with a text. Message: transportation. En route. Maintain operational security. Trust no one until you reach Blackbird Command. Stella stared at the message, then deleted it according to protocol. In 6 hours she would disappear from Nellis Air Force Base as quietly as she had arrived 3 years ago. Master Sergeant Bradley would receive orders transferring Airman Ward to Wright-Patterson for unspecified training. Captain Morrison and his pilots would never know that their maintenance technician had once designed the most advanced radar systems in the world. But before she left, there was something she needed to do. Stella powered up her personal laptop and began typing a detailed technical report on the Viper 7 radar degradation. If she was right about the sabotage, if the patterns she had detected were part of a larger attack on American aircraft, then the maintenance crews at Nellis needed to know what to look for. She couldn't sign the report with her real credentials, Doctor. Stella Ward's expertise would raise too many questions. But she could provide the technical analysis that might save lives, even if she couldn't reveal how she knew what she knew. As she worked, Stella reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. 3 years ago, she had been one of the most respected radar engineers in the country. Tomorrow she would return to that world, but under circumstances she couldn't have imagined. The woman who had been dismissed as just maintenance crew was about to become the military's best hope for stopping a sabotage operation that threatened every advanced aircraft in the American arsenal. But first, she had to survive long enough to reach Area 51, because if Colonel Hayes was right, if Sullivan's network was still active and targeting the systems Stella had designed, then her recall to active duty had just painted a target on her back that would be visible from space. Outside her apartment window, the lights of Las Vegas glittered in the distance, oblivious to the deadly game being played in the shadows of America's most classified military installations. In a few hours, those lights would be the last normal thing Stella saw for a very long time. Her phone buzzed one final time. Phoenix, this is Blackbird. Package is 5 minutes out. Time to come home. Stella closed her laptop, shouldered her pack, and walked toward a future that would either vindicate everything she had sacrificed or destroy her completely. The maintenance technician who had grounded Viper 7 was about to become Dr. Stella Ward again, and this time, the stakes were higher than anyone could imagine. The black SUV that picked up Stella Ward from her apartment looked like any other government vehicle, but she noticed the subtle modifications: reinforced glass, run-flat tires, and communication equipment that suggested this wasn't routine transportation. The driver, a stone-faced Air Force security police sergeant, said nothing during the 40-minute drive to what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Las Vegas. Meanwhile, back at Nellis Air Force Base, Master Sergeant Bradley was staring at orders that made no sense. Temporary assignment to Wright-Patterson? He muttered, reading the transfer paperwork for the 3rd time. For specialized training in what? The orders were frustratingly vague, citing only advanced diagnostic procedures and classified systems analysis. But what bothered Bradley most was the timing. 3 days after Ward had demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond her supposed qualifications, Captain Morrison was having similar thoughts as he reviewed the incident report he'd been asked to file about the Viper 7 radar failure. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations had requested detailed documentation of Ward's diagnostic methods, her technical explanations, and her background. "Something's not adding up," he told Lieutenant Chun as they stood in the now empty maintenance bay where Viper 7 had been stationed. Basic maintenance technicians don't just happen to know advanced electromagnetic theory. Chun nodded, studying the diagnostic equipment that Ward had used with such obvious expertise. "I've been thinking about that conversation we had. The way she explained cavity resonance and thermal stress patterns, That's graduate-level engineering. Physics, which raises the question, Morrison continued. What's someone with graduate-level engineering knowledge doing changing oil and rotating tires for 3 years? Their speculation was interrupted by the arrival of 2 men in civilian suits who moved with the purposeful stride of federal investigators. The older man, tall and lean with graying temples, introduced himself as Agent Michael Torres from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. His younger partner, Agent Sarah Kim, carried herself with the alert posture of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. "Gentlemen," Torres said, producing his credentials, "we need to discuss Airman Stella Ward." Morrison and Chun exchanged glances. In their experience, a FOS, I didn't investigate routine maintenance personnel, unless something significant was happening. "What kind of discussion?" Morrison asked carefully. "The kind that requires security clearances and signed non-disclosure agreements," Agent Kim replied, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. 20 minutes later, they were seated in a secure conference room normally reserved for classified briefings. Torres spread a collection of photographs and technical diagrams across the table, images that made Morrison's blood run cold. "What you're looking at," Torres began, "are radar diagnostic patterns from F-22s at Langley, F-35s at Luke Air Force Base, and B-2 bombers at Whiteman, all showing the same type of degradation that Ward identified in your F-16. Chun leaned forward, studying the waveform patterns. "These are identical signatures." "That's not possible unless it's coordinated," Kim finished. "We're looking at systematic sabotage of our most advanced aircraft, targeting specifically the radar and stealth systems." Morrison felt his stomach drop. "How many aircraft are affected?" 47 confirmed, probably twice that many we haven't detected yet, Torres replied grimly. "The sabotage is sophisticated, designed to cause failures during high-stress combat situations, not routine operations." "Which means," Chun said, her voice barely above a whisper, "whoever's doing this wants our pilots to die when they're actually fighting." Torres nodded. "The question is how a maintenance technician at Nellis was able to detect patterns that our best engineers at Wright-Patterson missed." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a crash site. Morrison looked at the diagnostic patterns again, remembering Ward's precise technical explanations and her obvious familiarity with advanced radar systems. "You think Ward is involved in the sabotage?" he asked. "We think Ward knows more than she's told anyone," Kim replied. "Her technical knowledge, her diagnostic capabilities, her ability to predict failure patterns, none of it matches her official background." Torres pulled out another file, this one marked with classification stamps that made Morrison uncomfortable. "Airman Stella Ward enlisted in the Air Force 4 years ago. Before that, her background is surprisingly sparse. No college records, no previous employment, no significant digital footprint." "That's unusual," Chun observed. "It's impossible," Kim corrected. "Nobody lives in modern America without leaving electronic traces. Credit cards, social media, employment records, tax filings. Ward's background looks like it was constructed rather than lived." Morrison was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. "You think she's using a false identity?" "We think Stella Ward isn't her real name," Torres confirmed. "We think she's someone with access to classified radar technology who disappeared 3 years ago and surfaced as a maintenance technician at Nellis." The pieces were falling into place, but they formed a picture that Morrison didn't like. If Ward was using a false identity, if she had access to classified technology, if she could predict radar failures with impossible accuracy, then she was either an extremely valuable asset or an extremely dangerous threat. "Where is she now?" Chun asked. "Temporarily reassigned," Kim said, which Morrison recognized as bureaucratic speak for disappeared into the black world of classified operations. Back at the warehouse facility, Stella was experiencing her own version of uncomfortable questions. The building's exterior had been deliberately deceptive inside. It housed some of the most sophisticated communications and analysis equipment she had ever seen. Colonel Rebecca Hayes looked older than Stella remembered. Her auburn hair now streaked with gray and new lines around her eyes that spoke of 3 years of difficult decisions. But her presence still commanded the room with the same authority that had made her one of the youngest full colonels in Air Force history. "Phoenix," Hayes said, using Stella's operational call sign. "Welcome back to the world of the living." Stella remained standing, maintaining the military bearing that had been drilled into her years before she became a maintenance technician. "Colonel, I need to understand the scope of what we're dealing with." Hayes activated a wall-mounted display that showed a map of the United States dotted with red markers. 47 confirmed sabotage incidents across 12 air bases. The pattern started 6 months ago, but it's accelerating. All using variations of the degradation signature I detected at Nellis. Your signature, Phoenix. The sabotage is targeting the specific radar systems you designed during Project Nightfall. The confirmation hit Stella like a physical blow. Her worst fears were being realized. The research she had poured her life into, the systems designed to protect American pilots, were being turned against them. Sullivan's network? Sullivan died in federal prison 18 months ago, Hayes replied. But his network survived. We think they've been planning this operation since you first exposed them. Stella studied the map, her mind automatically analyzing the pattern of attacks. The timing suggests they're building towards something larger. A coordinated assault designed to cripple our air superiority during a specific operational window. That's our assessment. The question is when and where they plan to strike. Hayes pulled up another display showing classified intelligence reports from around the world. Chinese and Russian military exercises have increased dramatically in the past 6 months. North Korea is moving advanced surface-to-air missile systems into position. Iran is conducting routine naval exercises in the Persian Gulf. They're coordinating, Stella realized. The sabotage operation is designed to create a window of vulnerability during which multiple adversaries can act simultaneously. Which brings us to why we recalled you, Hayes continued. You're the only person who understands these systems well enough to develop countermeasures. But more importantly, you're the only person who might be able to identify the specific vulnerabilities being exploited. Stella felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. For 3 years, she had lived quietly, avoiding the complex moral calculations that came with classified work. Now she was being asked to step back into a world where her decisions could affect the lives of thousands of people. "Colonel, there's something else you need to know," she said. "The diagnostic I performed at Nellis, I left a technical report with the maintenance crew. If a FOSI is investigating my background, they're going to want to know how I knew what I knew." Hayes nodded grimly. "We're aware. Captain Morrison and his team are being briefed as we speak. The cover story is that you were an undercover Air Force investigator assigned to monitor for sabotage. And if they don't buy that, then we tell them enough of the truth to secure their cooperation," Hayes replied. "Because, Phoenix, we're going to need all the help we can get." As if summoned by her words, an alarm began sounding throughout the facility. A technician burst into the room, his face pale with urgency. "Colonel, we're getting reports of multiple aircraft failures at Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska. F-22s experiencing complete radar system failures during a training exercise with simulated Russian fighters." Hayes and Stella exchanged grim looks. The sabotage operation had just escalated from isolated incidents to active combat simulation. "Disruption. How many aircraft?" Stella asked. 8 Raptors, all experiencing simultaneous radar failure while engaged with aggressor aircraft, the technician reported. Stella felt her blood turn to ice. 8 F-22s losing radar simultaneously during combat training wasn't coincidence, it was a demonstration. Someone was showing the American military exactly how vulnerable their most advanced aircraft had become. "Colonel," she said quietly, "I think we just saw our timeline accelerate. Whatever they're planning, it's starting now." The investigation that had begun with a single F-16 at Nellis Air Force Base had just become a race against time to prevent the systematic crippling of American air power. And at the center of it all was a woman who had spent 3 years hiding in plain sight, about to discover that sometimes the past doesn't just catch up with you, sometimes it drags you into a future more dangerous than anything you tried to escape. The secure video conference connected 3 locations simultaneously. The warehouse facility where Stella sat with Colonel Hayes, the AFOSI briefing room at Nellis where Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Chun waited with Agents Torres and Kim, and a third location that appeared to be deep underground, where a man in Air Force General stars sat behind a desk marked only with the words, "Blackbird Actual." Stella recognized General Patricia Lawson immediately, though she hadn't seen her former program director in 3 years. Lawson had aged considerably. The stress of managing America's most classified aerospace programs had carved new lines around her eyes and turned her dark hair almost completely gray. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Lawson began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing presidents and defense secretaries, "what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. The existence of this program, the individuals involved, and the capabilities we've developed are known to fewer than 20 people in the entire government." Captain Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair at Nellis. In 15 years of military service, he had never been briefed into anything approaching this level of classification. 3 years ago, Lawson continued, the Air Force discovered that one of our most sensitive research programs had been compromised by foreign intelligence services. The breach involved the theft of radar and stealth technology that forms the backbone of our air superiority capabilities. On the screen, Stella could see Morrison and Chun exchanging glances. They were beginning to understand that their maintenance technician had been connected to something far beyond routine aircraft service. The principal researcher on that program, Lawson said, was Dr. Stella Ward, one of the most brilliant radar engineers this country has ever produced. At age 28, Dr. Ward held more patents in advanced electromagnetic systems than most engineers accumulate in entire careers. Agent Torres leaned forward at his location. "General, what happened to Dr. Ward?" Dr. Ward discovered the security breach and attempted to expose it through proper channels, Lawson replied. "Unfortunately, the conspiracy reached into levels of government and industry that made a conventional investigation impossible. When Dr. Ward refused to remain silent, powerful people decided she represented a threat that needed to be neutralized." Lieutenant Chun's voice came through the speakers. "Neutralized how?" "Character assassination," Stella said quietly, speaking for the first time since the conference began. "They destroyed my professional reputation, questioned my security clearance, and made it impossible for me to work in my field." Morrison stared at the screen showing the woman he had known as Airman Ward. Seeing her in this context speaking as an equal to generals and federal agents was like discovering that his mechanic was actually a Formula One engineer. "The official story," General Lawson continued, was that Dr. Ward had suffered a psychological breakdown due to work stress. The unofficial reality was that she had been targeted for elimination by people who couldn't risk exposure of their criminal activities. "So you faked her death?" Agent Kim asked. "We gave her a new identity and a chance to disappear," Colonel Hayes interjected. "Stella Ward, the scientist, ceased to exist." Stella Ward, the maintenance technician, was born with a clean background and no connection to classified programs. "For 3 years," Stella added, "I lived quietly, fixed aircraft, and tried to forget that I had ever designed the systems that were keeping American pilots alive. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Morrison was processing the revelation that the woman who had changed oil in his aircraft was actually one of the country's most important defense researchers. "General," Torres said finally, "what changed? Why reveal Dr. Ward's identity now?" Lawson's expression grew grim. "Because the people who destroyed her career have spent 3 years turning her own research against us. The sabotage affecting. Our aircraft fleet uses Dr. Ward's algorithms and exploits vulnerabilities that only she fully understands." A new voice entered the conference. Agent Kim, her tone sharp with realization. "They're using her work to kill American pilots." "Exactly," Stella replied, her voice carrying years of suppressed anger. "The irony is perfect. The research I did to protect our aircraft is being used to ensure they fail at the worst possible moments." General Lawson activated a new display showing global military positioning. "Intelligence suggests we're facing a coordinated attack designed to exploit the window of vulnerability created by the sabotage. Chinese forces are positioning for action in the Taiwan Strait. Russian units are moving toward Ukraine's borders. Iranian naval forces are threatening shipping lanes in the Persian Gulf." "All simultaneously?" Morrison asked, the strategic implications hitting him like a physical blow. "All during the next 72 hours, Hayes confirmed. "They're planning to trigger multiple conflicts when our air superiority capabilities are compromised." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Morrison realized he was looking at potential World War III, triggered by sabotage that had been years in the making. "Dr. Ward," Agent Torres said, "can the sabotage be reversed?" Stella studied the technical data streaming across her displays. "The modifications are sophisticated but not permanent. However, fixing them requires understanding exactly how my original algorithms have been corrupted." "Which means?" Chen asked. "Which means I need to examine the sabotaged aircraft systems directly," Stella replied. "I need to see the specific modifications they've made to my code." General Lawson leaned forward. "Dr. Ward, what you're describing would require access to multiple classified aircraft at different bases. The security implications—" "General," Stella interrupted, with respect, "the security implications of losing 47 advanced aircraft during simultaneous global conflicts are considerably worse." The pointed observation silenced the room. Everyone understood that conventional security protocols were meaningless if the systems they were designed to protect had already been compromised. "There's another problem," Colonel Hayes added. "The people behind this sabotage know that Dr. Ward is the only person capable of stopping them. The moment her identity becomes known, she becomes a target for elimination." Morrison's voice came through the speakers with new urgency. "How much time do we have?" "Based on the Alaska incident and the acceleration of international military preparations," General Lawson replied, "we estimate less than 48 hours before the coordinated attacks begin." Stella felt the familiar weight of impossible decisions settling on her shoulders. For 3 years, she had lived quietly, avoiding the moral complexities that came with classified research. Now she was being asked to risk everything to stop a conspiracy that she had inadvertently made possible. "Dr. Ward," Agent Kim said, "there's something else you need to know. The investigation into your background at Nellis has attracted attention from outside agencies. People are asking questions about why a maintenance technician knew classified information." "What kind of people?" Hayes asked sharply. "The kind that have been looking for Dr. Stella Ward for 3 years, Torres replied. Grimly. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Stella's attempt to save one F-16 had inadvertently exposed her location to the same people who had destroyed her career and were now sabotaging American aircraft. "They know where I am," Stella said quietly. "We believe so," Kim confirmed. "Which Means your window for stopping this operation is even smaller than we thought. General Lawson's voice carried the weight of command decisions that could affect millions of lives. Dr. Ward, I need to know, can you develop countermeasures to the sabotage in less than 48 hours? Stella looked at the data streams, the intelligence reports, and the faces of people who were asking her to risk everything to save aircraft and pilots she would never meet. 3 years ago, she had tried to do the right thing and had been destroyed for it. Now she was being asked to try again, knowing that failure could mean global conflict and success could mean her death. Yes, she said finally. But I'll need help, and I'll need access to aircraft at multiple bases. What kind of help? Morrison asked. Stella looked directly into the camera connecting her to Nellis Air Force Base. I'll need maintenance technicians who understand both the practical and theoretical aspects of these systems. I'll need people who can implement modifications quickly and accurately under pressure. You're talking about your team at Nellis, Chun realized. I'm talking about people who've proven they can think beyond their official qualifications, Stella confirmed. People who understand that sometimes the most important work gets done by those who aren't supposed to be capable of doing it. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had been dismissed as just maintenance crew was now asking for help from other maintenance crew members to save the most advanced aircraft in the world. General, Morrison said, if Dr. Ward needs a team, my people are ready. You understand the risks? Lawson asked. If this operation fails, if Dr. Ward's identity is compromised, everyone involved becomes a target. General, Morrison replied, 3 days ago, Dr. Ward saved my aircraft and possibly my life. If she needs help saving 47 more aircraft and preventing a war, then we're in. As the conference ended and plans began forming for the most dangerous 48 hours of their lives, Stella realized that her 3 years of hiding were truly over. The maintenance technician who had grounded one F-16 was about to become Dr. Stella Ward again, racing against time to prevent a conspiracy that threatened not just American air power, but global stability itself. The truth was finally out, and now everyone would discover whether it had emerged in time to matter. The abandoned warehouse had been transformed into a nerve center that would have impressed the Pentagon. Banks of computer screens displayed real-time intelligence feeds from around the globe, while secure communication links connected the facility to air bases across 3 continents. But for all the high-tech equipment surrounding her, Stella felt more isolated than she had during 3 years of hiding in plain sight. The weight of 47 compromised aircraft and potential global conflict pressed down on her shoulders as she studied the sabotage patterns that had been uploaded from bases worldwide. Each diagnostic signature told the same story, her own algorithms, corrupted and weaponized against the aircraft they were designed to protect. Dr. Ward, Colonel Hayes approached her workstation, carrying a secure tablet loaded with files that would change everything. We've received 3 separate offers that you need to consider. Stella looked up from her analysis, noting the tension in Hayes' expression. What kind of offers? The kind that could solve all your problems while potentially creating bigger ones, Hayes replied, setting the tablet on the desk. The first is from Lockheed Martin. They're offering you a position as Chief Systems Engineer for their Skunk Works division. Complete rehabilitation of your reputation, unlimited research budget, and a chance to design the next generation of stealth technology. The offer was everything Stella had lost 3 years ago, and more. The Skunk Works was legendary in aerospace, engineering the birthplace of the U-2, the SR-71, and technologies that pushed the boundaries of physics. It was the kind of position that most engineers could only dream of. Full reinstatement of my security clearance? She asked. Higher than your original clearance, Hayes confirmed. They want you designing systems that won't exist for another decade. Stella scrolled through the offer details, her engineer's mind automatically calculating the resources she would have at her disposal. The budget figures alone were staggering enough to fund research programs that could revolutionize aerospace technology. What's the second offer? Hayes' expression grew more complex. Boeing. They're offering something different, a position. Heading their new cybersecurity division, specifically focused on protecting aircraft systems from the kind of sabotage we're dealing with now. The irony was bitter. The same industry that had helped destroy her career was now competing to hire her expertise in preventing exactly the kind of attack she was currently fighting. And the third? That one's more complicated, Hayes said quietly. It comes from a consortium of defense contractors and government agencies. They want to create an entirely new organization, a rapid response engineering corps that would handle emerging threats to critical defense systems. Stella studied the proposal, recognizing the scope and ambition of what was being offered. They want me to lead it. They want you to build it from the ground up. Recruit your own team, establish your own protocols, answer directly to the Secretary of Defense. Complete autonomy to address threats like this before they become existential crises. The three offers represented different paths forward, each with profound implications for her future and for national security. But as she read through the details, Stella became aware of voices rising in the adjacent communication center. Need to understand that Dr. Ward is under federal protection, Agent Torres was saying into a secure phone. Any attempt to interfere with this operation will be considered an act of terrorism. The conversation drew Stella's attention away from the offers. She could see Torres and Agent Kim huddled around a communications console, their expressions grim. "Colonel," she called out, "what's happening?" Hayes looked toward the communication center, her face darkening. "We've got a problem. Multiple intelligence agencies are reporting unusual activity around several airbases. The same people who compromised Dr. Ward's original research are mobilizing." Agent Kim approached their workstation, her phone still pressed to her ear. "Dr. Ward, we're tracking at least 3 separate teams moving toward facilities where you might be working. They know you're back in play." The implications hit Stella immediately. Her decision to help stop the sabotage had painted a target on her back that was visible to the same network that had destroyed her career. But now the stakes were higher. If they eliminated her, the countermeasures to the aircraft sabotage would die with her. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "Unknown," Torres replied. "But we're also getting reports of accelerated military activity worldwide. Chinese naval forces are moving toward Taiwan ahead of schedule. Russian armor is rolling toward the Ukrainian border. Whatever timeline we thought we had just got shorter." Stella looked at the 3 career offers on the tablet, then at the intelligence feeds showing global military positioning, then at the diagnostic patterns of sabotaged aircraft. 3 paths forward, each representing a different future: corporate success, cybersecurity leadership, or building something entirely new. But there was a 4th option that none of them had mentioned. "Colonel," she said quietly, "what if we're approaching this wrong?" Hayes looked up from an intelligence briefing. "How do you mean?" "Everyone's assuming I need to choose between these offers, between different ways of continuing my career," Stella explained, her voice gaining strength as the idea crystallized. "But what if the real choice is between playing their game and changing the rules entirely?" Agent Kim moved closer, intrigued. "What are you thinking?" Stella stood and walked to the main display showing the global situation. "For 3 years, I've been hiding from a system that values corporate profits over national security, that destroys whistleblowers and rewards conspirators. These offers are all attempts to bring me back into that same system." She gestured toward the intelligence feeds. "But this crisis proves that the system is fundamentally broken. We're facing global conflict because people with security clearances sold military secrets for money, and because the institutions that should have protected us were more concerned with covering up embarrassment than stopping espionage." "Colonel," Hayes was beginning to understand. You're talking about something outside the traditional defense contractor model. I'm talking about something that can't be bought, can't be corrupted, and can't be silenced by people who prioritize politics. Overprotection, Stella replied. What if instead of joining Lockheed or Boeing or some new government agency, we created an independent organization dedicated to protecting critical infrastructure from exactly these kinds of threats? The idea was audacious. Hayes could see the vision taking shape, an organization that operated outside the traditional defense establishment, funded independently, and accountable only to the mission of protecting American technological superiority. The technical challenges alone would be enormous, Torres observed. The political resistance would be even bigger, Kim added. Every major defense contractor would see you as a threat to their business model. Stella smiled for the first time. In days, good, maybe it's time they felt threatened. Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number she didn't recognize. Hayes nodded, indicating she should answer. Dr. Ward, this is Master Sergeant Bradley at Nellis. Bradley's voice carried an urgency that made everyone in the room pay attention. I need to speak with you about something that can't wait. What is it, Sergeant? Ma'am, we've been analyzing the aircraft in our inventory using the diagnostic protocols from your technical report. We found something you need to know about. Stella felt her heart rate spike. What kind of something? The sabotage isn't limited to the aircraft you've identified, Bradley continued. We're finding similar patterns in ground support equipment, communication systems, even base security networks. Ma'am, this isn't just about aircraft. They've compromised everything. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. If the sabotage extended beyond aircraft to include ground systems, communications, and security networks, then the scope of the conspiracy was far larger than anyone had imagined. How extensive? Hayes asked, her face pale. We don't know yet, Bradley replied. But Dr. Ward, if these patterns are consistent across other bases, we're looking at total systems compromise. Not just air superiority everything. Stella closed her eyes, the magnitude of the situation washing over her. This wasn't just about preventing the failure of 47 aircraft. This was about the complete penetration of American military infrastructure by hostile intelligence services. Sergeant Bradley, she said quietly, I need you to send me everything you found. Every diagnostic pattern, every anomaly, every system that shows signs of compromise. Already in progress, ma'am. But Dr. Ward, there's something else. We're getting reports of unusual activity around the base perimeter. Security is being increased. But ... double quote, Sergeant. Ma'am, I think they know you're coming back. As the call ended, Stella looked around the room at faces that reflected her own realization. The choice she faced wasn't just about her career or even about stopping the current sabotage. It was about whether she would accept the constraints of a system that had already proven it could be corrupted, or whether she would risk everything to build something better. The three offers on the tablet represented safety, success, and conventional career rehabilitation. But the fourth option, the one she was beginning to envision, represented something far more dangerous and far more important. Colonel, she said finally, I've made my decision. Hayes looked at her, seeing something in Stella's expression. That reminded her of the brilliant young engineer who had first joined Project Nightfall, someone willing to risk everything for the possibility of protecting others. And I'm not taking any of those offers, Stella replied, her voice carrying a conviction that surprised even herself. I'm going to stop this sabotage, expose the people responsible, and then build something that can prevent it from ever happening again. The choice was made. Dr. Stella Ward was about to step out of the shadows not as a corporate employee or government contractor, but as something entirely new, a guardian of technology who answered to no one except the mission itself. The only question now was whether she would survive long enough to see it through. The attack came at 0347 hours. Just as Stella was uploading the final countermeasure algorithms to the secure network that would distribute them to airbases worldwide. The warehouse facility's perimeter alarms shrieked through the Nevada darkness, followed immediately by the distinctive crack of high-velocity rifle fire. Contact. Multiple hostiles approaching from the north perimeter. The voice of Air Force Security Police Staff Sergeant Maria Santos crackled through the facility's intercom system. At least 6 operators, military-grade equipment, coordinated assault pattern. Colonel Hayes was already moving, her years of combat experience taking over as she coordinated the facility's defense. Phoenix, how much more time do you need? Stella's fingers flew across her workstation as code compiled and uploaded to servers around the globe. 3 minutes for primary distribution, another 5 for verification protocols. We might not have 8 minutes, Agent Torres replied, studying the tactical display that showed hostile forces advancing through multiple approach routes. These aren't amateurs, they know exactly what they're doing. Through the reinforced windows, muzzle flashes lit up the desert landscape like deadly fireflies. The attackers were using advanced night vision equipment and moving with the precision of special operations forces. This wasn't a hastily organized hit. It was a military operation designed to eliminate America's only hope of stopping the sabotage. Dr. Ward, Agent Kim called out while checking her sidearm. We need to discuss evacuation protocols. Negative, Stella replied without looking up from her screens. If I don't finish uploading these countermeasures, every compromised aircraft becomes a liability within hours. We hold this position. The building shook as an explosion rocked the northern wall. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the nerve center in an eerie red glow that made everyone look like participants in a nightmare. Phoenix, Hayes said urgently. That sounded like shaped charges. They're not trying to capture the facility, they're trying to destroy it. Stella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night air. If the attackers were using demolition charges, they weren't planning to interrogate her or steal her research. They were planning to eliminate both her and the countermeasures she was developing. Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call that made her blood freeze. The display showed Captain Morrison's number from Nellis Air Force Base. Captain, please. Tell me you're calling with good news, she answered. Dr. Ward, we've got a situation here that you need to know about. Morrison's voice was tense with barely controlled urgency. Base security just intercepted communications, indicating that Nellis is about to be hit by multiple teams simultaneously. The implications crashed over Stella like a tsunami. The attack on her location was just one prong of a coordinated assault, designed to eliminate everyone who could implement her countermeasures. How many people know about the countermeasure protocols? She asked. Everyone who received your technical briefing, Morrison replied. Master Sergeant Bradley, the maintenance. Teams from 3 squadrons and the FOSI agents still on base. They're targeting everyone, Stella realized with horror. It's not enough to kill me, they need to eliminate anyone who understands how to implement the fixes. Another explosion rocked the facility, this one closer to the main server room. Hayes grabbed Stella's arm, her face grim with the recognition that their defensive position was deteriorating rapidly. Phoenix, we need to move to the backup facility, she said urgently. There is no backup facility, Stella replied. Her attention split between the upload progress and the increasing sounds of combat outside. This is it. If we lose this position, we lose everything. Agent Torres appeared at her workstation, his tactical vest marked with dust from the explosions. Dr. Ward, I've got bad news and worse news. The bad news is that we're facing at least 12 hostiles with military-grade equipment. The worst news is that satellite intelligence shows similar teams moving on installations in Germany, Japan, and South Korea. They're going global, Hayes said, her voice carrying the weight of strategic implications that extended far beyond their Immediate situation. Stella's screen showed the upload progress crawling toward completion. 68% distributed to American bases, 71% to Allied installations worldwide. Each percentage point represented dozens of aircraft that would be protected from sabotage, but the progress felt agonizingly slow as the sounds of battle grew closer. 75%, she announced, trying to keep her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The lights flickered and died as another explosion cut the facility's main power supply. Emergency generators kicked in seconds later, but the brief interruption had caused several secure connections to drop offline. Re-establishing links, Stella said, her engineers' training taking over as she rerouted data streams through backup pathways. We're back online, but we lost about 30 seconds of upload time. Staff Sergeant Santos' voice crackled through the intercom again. Facility breach. Hostiles have penetrated the east entrance. All personnel, this is not a drill. Hayes drew her sidearm and moved toward the main entrance to the nerve center. Phoenix, whatever happens, keep uploading. Even if we can't hold this position, those countermeasures need to reach every base. 82%, Stella reported, her voice barely audible over the gunfire that was now echoing through the facility's corridors. Her phone rang again. This time it was Master Sergeant Bradley calling. From Nellis. Dr. Ward, we're under attack here too, but we've got your countermeasure protocols distributed to maintenance teams across the base. Bradley's voice was calm despite the obvious sounds of combat in the background. Even if they take out our primary teams, we've got backup personnel who can implement the fixes. Sergeant, get your people to safety, Stella ordered. The algorithms are more important than, man, with respect. The algorithms don't mean anything if there's nobody left to implement them, Bradley interrupted. We're holding our position. The dedication in his voice reminded Stella of why she had chosen to work with maintenance crews rather than corporate executives. These were people who understood that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were impossible. 87%, she announced to the room. Agent Kim appeared at her side, her weapon drawn and her face streaked with dust. Dr. Ward, we've got hostiles 2 corridors away. Hayes is leading the defense, but we need an exit strategy. 91%, Stella replied, her fingers never pausing in their work. We're almost there. The distinctive sound of flashbang grenades echoed through the facility, followed by shouting in what sounded like multiple languages. The attackers weren't just American mercenaries. This was an international operation, involving personnel from multiple countries. 94%, Stella called out, her voice rising above the chaos. Colonel Hayes backed into the nerve center, her weapon trained on the entrance. They're through our primary defenses. 60 seconds, maybe less. 97%. Stella announced, watching the progress bar crawl toward completion with agonizing slowness. The door to the nerve center exploded inward as shaped charges blew through the reinforced barriers. Smoke and debris filled the air as dark figures in tactical gear poured into the room. 99%, Stella shouted, her hand hovering over the final activation key that would complete the global distribution of countermeasures. Step away from the console. The voice carried a Russian accent and the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Dr. Ward, you will cease all activities immediately. Stella looked up to see 6 figures in full tactical gear, their weapons trained on everyone in the room. At their head stood a man whose face she recognized from intelligence briefings, Colonel Viktor Petrov, formerly of Russian military intelligence, now working for the highest bidder in the shadow world of international espionage. Colonel Petrov, she said calmly, her finger still poised over the activation key. I should have known you'd be involved in this. Dr. Ward, you will step away from that console, or we will kill everyone in this room, Petrov replied, his weapon trained directly at her chest. If you kill me, you'll never know whether I completed the upload, Stella pointed out. And if I completed the upload, your entire operation becomes worthless. Petrov's eyes narrowed as he calculated the implications. Behind him, his team maintained their weapons training on Hayes, Torres, Kim, and the other personnel in the room. The upload progress shows 99%, he observed, studying the screens over her shoulder. You need only to press one key to complete your work. That's right, Stella confirmed. One key press, and every aircraft in the American arsenal becomes immune to your sabotage. Then you will not press that key, Petrov said coldly. Stella looked around the room at the faces of people who had risked everything to help her reach this moment. Hayes, who had pulled her back from exile. Torres and Kim, who had investigated the conspiracy despite the dangers. The security personnel who were fighting to protect the facility. But most importantly, she thought about Master Sergeant Bradley and the maintenance crews at bases around the world. People like herself who had been underestimated and dismissed. Who were now the last line of defense against a conspiracy that threatened global stability. Colonel, she said quietly, you're making the same mistake everyone else has made. You're assuming that because I look like just a maintenance technician, I'm not willing to fight for what I believe in. Her finger moved toward the activation key. I would not do that if I were you, Petrov warned, his weapon centering on her forehead. Stella smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in 3 years. The thing about being underestimated, Colonel, is that people never see you coming. She pressed the key. The screens around the room lit up with confirmation signals as the countermeasure algorithms completed their global distribution. Across 6 continents, at dozens of air bases, maintenance crews were receiving the tools they needed to protect their aircraft from sabotage. Petrov's finger tightened on his trigger, but before he could fire, the facility's emergency systems activated. Blast doors slammed shut, separating his team and trapping them in a room that had just become their prison. Dr. Ward, Hayes said with obvious relief, remind me to never doubt your contingency planning. As security forces moved to secure the captured operatives, Stella's phone buzzed with incoming reports from around the world. The countermeasures were being implemented successfully. The sabotage network's years of planning had been undone in less than 10 minutes, but the victory had come at a cost. The attack on the facility had revealed the true scope of the conspiracy and the lengths to which hostile forces would go to protect their operations. Phoenix, Hayes said quietly, you realize there's no going back to anonymity after this. Stella looked at the screen showing successful countermeasure deployment worldwide, then at the captured operatives who had tried to stop her. Good, she replied. I'm tired of hiding. The maintenance technician who had once grounded a single F-16 had just saved the entire American air fleet. And this time, she was ready for whatever came next, 6 months after the night that changed everything. Dr. Stella Ward stood before a gathering that would have been impossible to imagine during her years in exile. The newly constructed Independent Defense Technology Institute occupied a sprawling campus in Colorado Springs, its state-of-the-art facilities humming with the energy of breakthrough. Research conducted free from corporate influence or political interference. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't in the buildings or equipment. It was in the people. Master Sergeant Tom Bradley adjusted his newly earned bachelor's degree hood as he prepared to address the Institute's first graduating class. The man who had supervised oil changes and tire rotations at Nellis Air Force Base was now the Institute's Director of Practical Applications, leading a revolution in how advanced technology was implemented at the operational level. 5 years ago, Bradley began, his voice carrying to an audience that included defense officials, foreign dignitaries, and journalists from around the world. I thought I knew everything about aircraft maintenance. I thought technical expertise belonged to people with advanced degrees working in corporate laboratories. In the audience, Stella felt a familiar sense of pride as she watched her former supervisor embrace possibilities he had never imagined. For himself, Dr. Ward taught me that expertise comes in many forms, Bradley continued. Sometimes the most important innovations happen when you combine theoretical knowledge with practical experience. Sometimes the best solutions come from people who understand both how things are supposed to work and how they actually work in the real world. The applause that followed was more than polite recognition. It represented a fundamental shift in how the defense establishment viewed talent and capability. The Institute had proven that extraordinary results could be achieved when brilliance was nurtured, regardless of its packaging. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chun, recently promoted and assigned as the Air Force liaison to the Institute, stood to present the graduation certificates. Her own journey from skeptical pilot to advocate for revolutionary training methods had paralleled the Institute's development. The graduates we're recognizing today, Chun announced, represent a new model for defense technology development. They've mastered both the theoretical foundations of advanced systems and the practical skills needed to implement them under real-world conditions. Among the graduates, Stella recognized faces from her 3 years at Nellis maintenance technicians, who had discovered they possessed the intelligence and creativity to become aerospace engineers, security personnel who had developed expertise in cybersecurity, logistics specialists who had revealed gifts for systems integration. But the Institute's impact extended far beyond individual transformations. The countermeasure protocols that Stella had uploaded during that desperate night in Nevada had evolved into a comprehensive defense framework that was being adopted by allied nations worldwide. General Patricia Lawson, now serving as the Institute's Director of Strategic Partnerships, approached the podium with reports that would have seemed like fantasy 6 months earlier. The Independent Defense Technology Institute has achieved something unprecedented in the defense industry, Lawson announced. We have developed and deployed protective systems for critical infrastructure that are immune to the kind of sabotage we faced last year. She activated a display showing global deployment statistics that painted an impressive picture of technological transformation. Our countermeasure protocols are now protecting aircraft, communication systems, and critical infrastructure across 23 countries. More importantly, we've trained over 400 technical specialists in the implementation and maintenance of these systems. The numbers were remarkable, but Stella knew that the Institute's true achievement wasn't quantifiable in statistics. They had proven that excellence could be cultivated outside the traditional corporate military-industrial complex, that innovation could thrive without the corrupting influence of profit-driven decision-making. Colonel Rebecca Hayes, now the Institute's Chief of Operations, provided an update on the global security situation that demonstrated just how successful their efforts had been. Intelligence reports indicate that the sabotage network responsible for last year's attacks has been completely dismantled, Hayes announced. 17 operatives have been arrested across 4 countries, including Colonel Viktor Petrov, who is currently serving a life sentence in federal prison. The capture of Petrov and his network had been possible only because the Institute's work had rendered their sabotage capabilities worthless. Without the ability to compromise American aircraft and infrastructure, the conspiracy had collapsed as various factions turned on each other in attempts to salvage their operations. But perhaps the most significant transformation was visible in the Institute's daily operations. The rigid hierarchies that had characterized Stella's previous experience in defense work had been replaced by collaborative teams where expertise was valued regardless of its source. Captain Jake Morrison, recently assigned as a test pilot for the Institute's experimental aircraft programs, exemplified this new approach. The man who had once questioned a maintenance technician's competence now regularly sought input from technical specialists at every level of the organization. The old model treated pilots as users of technology designed by others, Morrison explained during a panel discussion on integrated development. The Institute's approach makes us partners in the design process. When the people who fly the aircraft are involved in developing the systems, you get better results. This collaborative philosophy had produced innovations that were already revolutionizing aerospace technology. The Institute's aircraft were not only immune to the sabotage techniques that had threatened the fleet, but incorporated defensive systems that actively detected and countered hostile interference. As the ceremony concluded, Stella found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her from exile to leadership of an organization that was reshaping the landscape of defense technology. The Institute represented everything she had learned about the value of recognizing talent wherever it existed, and the importance of building systems that couldn't be corrupted by external pressures. Her phone buzzed with a message that brought her back to the present, a communication from the White House, requesting a briefing on the Institute's latest research into next-generation stealth technology. But more meaningful was the message that followed from a young airman at a base in Germany who had used the Institute's diagnostic protocols to prevent a potential aircraft failure that could have cost lives. Dr. Ward, the message read, I wanted you to know that the training I received through your Institute's program helped me identify a problem that our regular maintenance procedures missed. The aircraft was grounded safely, and we prevented what could have been a catastrophic failure. Thank you for showing us that we're capable of more than we ever imagined. Similar messages arrived daily from around the world, proof that the Institute's impact was being measured, not just in technological advancement, but in transformed lives and prevented tragedies. As the reception continued around her, Stella stepped outside onto a balcony overlooking the Colorado landscape. The view reminded her of the Nevada desert, where she had spent 3 years hiding from her own potential, convinced that her career was over and her contributions were no longer valued. She thought about the maintenance bay at Nellis, where she had first encountered Captain Morrison and his pilots, where her knowledge had been dismissed as impossible for someone in her position. That moment of recognition, when her expertise had been acknowledged, despite assumptions about her capabilities, had been the beginning of everything that followed. The Institute's success hadn't come from rejecting the existing defense establishment, but from proving that it could be improved through inclusion rather than exclusion. By recognizing that talent existed at every level of the military hierarchy, by creating opportunities for people to develop their full potential regardless of their starting point, they had built something stronger and more resilient than anything that had come before. Her secure phone rang with a call from Master Sergeant Bradley, who was coordinating with maintenance crews installations worldwide. Dr. Ward, he said, his voice carrying excitement that was infectious even over the phone. We just received confirmation from our partners in Australia. They've successfully implemented the new countermeasure protocols on their entire fighter fleet. More importantly, 3 of their maintenance technicians have been accepted into engineering programs based on the skills they developed through our training. Outstanding, Tom, Stella replied, using his first name as she had learned to do in the collaborative environment of the Institute. How are the other international partnerships developing? Beyond our best projections, Bradley replied. We've got requests for training partnerships from 14 countries, and the European Union wants to establish a sister facility based on our model. The global expansion of the Institute's mission represented validation of principles that had once seemed idealistic. The idea that excellence could be cultivated through opportunity rather than exclusive selection, that security could be enhanced through cooperation rather than secrecy, that innovation could thrive outside traditional corporate structures. All of these concepts were being proven on an international scale. As Stella ended the call and returned to the reception, she encountered Agent Michael Torres, now serving as the Institute's Director of Security Cooperation. His transition from investigating her background to protecting the organization she had built represented its own form of transformation. Dr. Ward, Torres said, I wanted you to know that the FBI's investigation into the sabotage network has been officially closed. Every lead has been pursued, every operative has been identified, and the threat has been completely neutralized. Any sign of attempts to reconstitute the network? Stella asked. None, Torres replied confidently. The combination of the criminal prosecutions and the technological countermeasures has made their approach completely obsolete. More importantly, the international cooperation we've fostered through the Institute has created an intelligence-sharing network that makes future conspiracies much more difficult to organize. The conversation was interrupted by applause from inside the building as the evening's final speaker took the podium. Through the windows, Stella could see that it was Agent Sarah Kim, now the Institute's Director of International Partnerships, preparing to announce the organization's next major initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, Kim began, I'm pleased to announce that the Independent Defense Technology Institute will be establishing educational partnerships with technical institutions in 12 countries, creating a global network for the development and protection of critical defense technologies. The announcement represented the culmination of everything Stella had envisioned when she chose to reject the corporate offers and build something entirely new. The Institute wasn't just protecting existing systems, it was creating a framework for international cooperation that would prevent future threats, while fostering the kind of innovation that could only come from diverse perspectives and collaborative effort. As the evening wound down, Stella found herself alone in her office, surrounded by awards and commendations that represented recognition she had never expected to receive. But the most meaningful item on her desk was a simple photograph, the maintenance crew from Nellis Air Force Base, taken during their last day working together before her recall to classified duty. In that image, she could see the faces of people who had accepted her as a colleague without knowing her credentials, who had defended her capabilities when others questioned them, who had proven that excellence existed wherever people were given the opportunity to develop their potential. Woman who had once been dismissed as just maintenance crew had built an organization that was reshaping the future of defense technology. But more importantly, she had proven that the most powerful force in national security wasn't advanced technology or classified intelligence. It was the recognition that extraordinary capability could emerge from the most unexpected places. Outside her window, the lights of Colorado Springs glittered in the distance, but Stella's thoughts were with the maintenance crews working night shifts at air bases around the world, the technical specialists implementing new protective systems, the students discovering that their potential extended far beyond their previous imagination. They were the true legacy of everything. She had built proof that when talent is recognized and nurtured, when people are given opportunities to exceed their own expectations, the results can change the world. The maintenance technician who had grounded one F-16 to prevent a failure had become the architect of a global transformation that would protect countless aircraft and save innumerable lives for generations to come. And this was only the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.